was kind of right below my belly button, and it's a solid mass that grows in your uterus, and that's exactly what it felt like, right? Like you'd swallowed like billiard balls.
Morgan Stanton is describing what fibroids feel like. Morgan was first diagnosed with them in her late 20s.
So as they got bigger and I'd had check-ins with the doctors, I knew it was fibroids, so I didn't have that fear of it being something else as it grew. But it was just like disconcerting that you just had this mass, unknown mass in your body growing unchecked. No one can really tell you anything about it. Yes, it's not cancer, but we don't know what it is kind of thing is never great to hear.
The fibroids came with a slew of symptoms.
Pelvic pain, discomfort, a lot of fatigue. And finally, they got so large, you could feel them essentially pressing on my abdomen.
And how old were you when you had your surgery for fibroids?
So I was 31 or 32.
What was that like?
It was very nerve-wracking. My mother flew in. I'd never had a surgery before, so I was just very nervous. I remember the morning of. So we arrive at the hospital. I've changed my gown. They want me to go pee, and I had gone pee like 5 times before we left, and I just couldn't, and they needed to hook me up to IVs. I'm laying in the bed, and 2 nurses come in to prep me, and each one grabs an arm simultaneously on each side. And they each grabbed my one arm to put the IVs in, but at that time, both my arms were like taken, being held. I'm not a dramatic person, but I got very upset. I started to cry and kind of get upset immediately because they had just kind of pinned me down unintentionally on both sides. And they immediately saw it was bad, and they backed off. You know, they weren't trying to be mean, and they did one arm at a time after that. But it was just scary. It is an invasive surgery. I had a laparoscopic myomectomy, and my surgeon was great. She was very kind. The surgery went well. I recovered quickly. But it made me ask so many questions during this process. Why have they appeared? And no one could give me an answer. And it was like, okay, well, are they going to come back? No one could give me an answer. Can I do anything to stop them from coming back? Again, there's no great answer. It's like, well, they may or may not.
5 years after her fibroid surgery, Morgan got pregnant and gave birth to her daughter.
I had to have a cesarean section because of the previous scar from the surgery. And they were always checking for fibroids. And I was like, will the pregnancy bring them back? And they just couldn't answer. And there were just so many unknowns. And for a condition that affects up to 30 to 50% of the population, it's just insane, right?
Morgan's experience with fibroids is a compelling story to listen to, but this is not an episode about fibroids. It is an episode about this.
No one can give me an answer.
And what Morgan, who's a scientist with a PhD in chemistry, did with her frustration.
There had been no research. This just kind of fundamentally bothered me as a scientist. Again, you just have these massive patient populations. This community had been there all along in the shadows, and we'd all just kind of been dealing with it. But again, nothing on the research side. I am not a trained OBGYN. I didn't have a background in reproductive science, but I was like, I'm going to take what I know in chemistry and bioengineering and try to shift this field because it needs scientists, it needs people that care, and the expertise is definitely out there. We just have to bring it together for this very important cause. So that's kind of what drives me, is just like, someone should be doing this, so why not me?
Morgan Stanton is the CEO of a women's health startup called Opal Therapeutics based in San Francisco. And the work she's doing now is trying to fix that problem of not enough knowledge, not enough data, and not enough research in issues like fibroids and other chronic conditions in women's health. How is she doing this? Take a listen to this.
It is unusual. We are collecting menstrual blood.
Collecting menstrual blood. You heard that right.
Because it is just a source of so many great cell types and biomarkers to study reproductive disease.
And the menstrual blood she's collecting is going towards building a model of the uterus that will help us understand chronic conditions better. It's called an organoid, but you can also call it this.
A uterus in a dish
what on earth is a uterus in a dish and why Morgan Stanton wants to collect menstrual blood. That's coming up after this break. This is Overlooked, and I'm Golda Arthur.
This is Overlooked, and my name is Carolyn. I'm listening from the beautiful west coast of Canada in the island city of Victoria.
This is Overlooked, and my name is Natasha. I'm listening from Crewe, a small town near Manchester in the UK.
This is Overlooked, and my name is Mel. I'm listening from Falls Church, Virginia, in the States.
This is Overlooked, and my name is Kasia. I'm listening from Poland.
I listened to Overlooked because I was diagnosed with ovarian cancer out of the blue 3 years ago. And Golda's platform has provided me with education, examples, knowledge, and delivered in such a calm and soothing way.
For me personally, Overlooked is the educational aspect of ending discrimination regarding women's health matters. Each story on the podcast is very motivational, and each woman that has shared hers is a hero in my eyes.
I started listening to Overlooked because I wanted to hear about Golda's mum's experience with ovarian cancer. I carried on listening because I love hearing all the women's stories, which have all been very honest, real, and inspiring.
And I listen to Overlooked because I write and speak and obsess over what researchers tell us is the implicit bias against women in the history of our women's healthcare. The cure? Keep telling your stories.
Hey, Morgan, thank you for joining me on Overlooked. I'm so excited to be having this conversation.
Yeah, happy to be here, Golda.
What would you say is the most overlooked aspect of what we're talking about today? And where is that inequality felt most deeply?
I think the most overlooked aspect is this day-to-day pain women are experiencing. So I think it's often just been like, well, they've dealt with it in the past. They can keep dealing with it now. They'll deal with it in the future kind of thing. And even if it's not extreme pain, if it's keeping you at home, if you're losing time with friends and family, if you're losing time with things you love, that's a problem. I think this gets glossed over time and time again. It's like just not as a big deal. And it should be. It's huge. We're losing time of our lives. So I think that's the most overlooked aspect of a lot of these chronic gynecological conditions is just sweeping them aside. And I think the biggest inequality comes down to if you have severe cases of these diseases, say maybe it's not just a day out from home, but you take a week off, or you have to wrangle childcare. Like this just is making your life so much more difficult, and it's just unfair, right? It's unfair that a medical system is ignoring you because your case is not extreme enough. So I think that's where the inequality is.
The first that I ever heard about your company and your work was through a LinkedIn post of someone who, I'm going to paraphrase here, but she was basically like, hooray, I gave my menstrual blood to Morgan Stanton because I really support their work. And I was like, well, that stopped my scroll. So tell me why you're collecting menstrual blood from people, Morgan.
We are collecting menstrual blood because it is just a source of so many great cell types and biomarkers to study reproductive disease. And I think it's just been underutilized the past 1,500 years.
just the past 1,500 years. So tell me a little bit more about what you just mentioned, why menstrual blood is so important and distinctive, what makes it different from blood elsewhere in our body and why it's useful.
Yeah, no, it's a great question. Why isn't menstrual blood the same as like venous blood that I do a blood draw from my arm? You just have unique cell types and biomarkers. So when you shed your menstrual layer during menstruation, there's not just blood cells, but there's a lot of other cell types that come off, as well as their proteins and biomarkers. In the past decade, there's just been a lot of research showing those cells and protein markers are really good indicators of a woman's reproductive health.
Okay, so tell me what you do with all this menstrual blood that you're collecting.
We bring a kit to patients in the Bay Area. So I live in San Francisco. So if someone wants to participate, we bring them a little kit that we've made in-house. We essentially have gotten little coolers and we give you a brand new menstrual cup and instructions on how to use it if you don't have your own. We give you sterile collection tubes and an ice pack. It's very straightforward. And you just let us know when you're ready. And you put it in the cooler with the ice pack. And we pick it up and we process it. So there's very few components, actually. We've also just started shipping kits out of state. And we bring it back to our lab and we try to process it very quickly. By process it, I mean we want to get those cell types of interest. So we put it on refrigeration. We basically remove all the red blood cells. Those are not of interest to us. And what's left behind is a very small fraction of other cell types. And so we isolate these by rinsing. There's a little bit of enzyme digestion. And then we can grow these out in our laboratory. So that 100 cells, we can grow out to 10,000 and we can biobank them. So basically cryopreserve them and start to use them for testing. So the cells that we grow out, we grow them into these 3D models called organoids. So these are miniature models of human tissue. So we're focused on the uterus, so we call them uterine organoids. So they represent cell types, biology, biomarkers. All of those get covered in this organoid. But now they're at the microscopic level, so we can look at many at once, right? We don't have to use a whole organ. We don't have to use an animal model. Now we have human tissue and a microscope for testing. And so what I mean by testing, one is just kind of genetic analysis. So if we look at the genetic profile of someone with fibroids versus someone who doesn't, what are we seeing? What markers are upregulated or downregulated? We've looked at inflammation profiles. So donors with endometriosis have shown an inflammatory signal in our model that we can track. And then we can also look at drug screening. I think the whole field has been neglected for the pharma industry for a very long time, and there's just a lot of work to be done. So we screen therapeutics of interest on our models, basically say, can we make a diseased organoid look more like a healthy one by adding a drug? And we're specifically interested in non-hormonal therapeutics. If you have endometriosis or fibroids, they often put you on what's called GnRHs, which are kind of like hormone blockers to stop the progress of the disease. And it's not because we understand the disease. It's more that we know shutting off hormones makes it stop, but that also means you're going to be in early menopause. And none of these are great options for patients. So we want to find an alternative path.
And so the tools that we have right now are very crude tools, right? They're not precise. They're not customized. It's just like, well, we'll just turn the hormone tap off and that's how we're going to fix it, because we haven't actually understood the true nature of the problem. Is that the case?
Exactly. And I truly want Opal to be a toolkit for women's health R&D. I think it's been neglected for such a long time, mostly because we just didn't have the tools to move it forward. So we've been using rodent models. They don't represent human biology very well at all. Even when I was my PhD, 10 years ago, it was a focus on using male rodent models. It was the female rodent was too complicated. And that's just the rodent. We're not even talking about people anymore, which is just insane. So I think giving that toolkit that we can not just use internally, but share with partners or other companies just to start getting more research done in the field.
Describe these organoids for me. How big are they? What do they look like? What do they feel like?
A uterus in a dish is this organoid model. So it's about the size, each one is about the size of a grain of sand or a little bit smaller. They're a spherical structure and they're hollow in the middle. They're very, very tiny. We can see them by eye if you held them up in a dish, but it looks like basically a grain of sand in a dish. So they're very small by eye. You're not going to see much. In a microscope, they look a lot like a balloon. They're a hollow sphere. And we're making basically the inner lining of the uterus, which is called the endometrium. That's what you shed during menstruation. And so they grow into these small microscopic spheres that are hollow, but have this kind of barrier layer of cells and lumen and proteins that we can analyze. So imagine if you looked in a microscope dish, a lot of small little balloons, essentially.
You use this phrase, so we can screen for therapeutics of interest. Tell me a little bit more about therapeutics of interest and what they are.
It kind of links to our genetic screening. So we also take these uterus in a dish, uterine organoids, and we get genetic profiles. These can give us kind of an idea of a potential genetic target for a drug. So we take that information and then bring it over to our drug screening. So we have target X, and we know there's potentially 1,000 drugs that might interact with target X. So now we can screen those 1,000 drugs on our uterine organoid samples.
So in this season on Overlooked, there's also an episode about tampon testing, how tampons were being tested in the past, how they're being tested right now. And in researching this episode, I found out about this device called the Syngina, which is a synthetic vagina, which is, what we use, what the industry uses to test tampons. And it's kind of mind-blowing. I actually Googled a picture of the Syngina. Somewhere in the back of my head, I thought that a synthetic vagina would at least look a little bit, kind of like a vagina. And it looks nothing like what you imagine it looks. So it's just interesting to me that the work that you're doing creating these organoids just seems like it belongs in a completely different realm of testing than what we've had before. Why does it seem like such a revolutionary concept, Morgan?
I think it's just because, you look at what we've tested before, the past 50 years. We've been primarily relying on rodent models, right? And they don't have a menstrual cycle. A fun fact you can share at a cocktail party. And we've often been testing on male rodent models. It's only recently we've even shifted to female rodent models. They're still not good replication of the female reproductive system. And then we're asking in biotech and pharma, if we test a drug here or medical device, it will translate now to a human patient in a phase 1, which is just crazy. You don't have to be a scientist to say, well, it's probably not going to, if it works in a mouse, it doesn't mean it's going to work in a person kind of thing. And so if we're trying to mimic something as complex as the menstrual cycle or hormones in the menstrual cycle, we need to have that in our research and development stage, not trying to force a rodent to have this in vivo experiment.
So where are you at in general in terms of the life cycle of your own work and of Opal Therapeutics? When did you begin and where are you at right now in terms of what you're trying to accomplish?
So Opal Therapeutics is almost 2 years old. I mean, for a startup, that's exciting. We're still very young. We started in 2023. So the past year especially has been building our biobank. So these are patient-derived cells. Like I said, I go and ask women to be donors and they want to volunteer to participate. And part of the reason we're building this biobank is when I first started, I just kind of assumed I could work with university or a partner, and no one was easy to access. There wasn't much out there, and they were very small, right? There's 5-10 samples. And you think of all the other diseases we study, and there's thousands of samples. We need more data, right? And so part of the reason of building this biobank is to have that statistically relevant data built up. And so we're getting people with, controls, no known gynecological disease. We're getting fibroids, endometriosis, PCOS, and we've gotten 40 so far this year, 40 donors. We want to get to 100 by the end of the year, and I want to keep going. I want to get to 500 in essentially 3 years and really have this broad spectrum of women represented from different ages, different backgrounds, different ethnicities. And so we can truly tackle these diseases and understand them at a much higher level than we have before. And so with the data we've gotten so far, we've gotten amazing early indicators. There's always the fear that menstrual blood won't hold the key to any diseases, right? Maybe it's not there. It could be a problem. But in time and time again, at different levels of the data, genetics, cytokines, inflammation, we've seen the disease markers there. So it's great. And so I think we have this amazing foundation. And so it's kind of launching us off in the fall to start doing more drug screening, more partnerships, and basically using this toolkit to really do some big acceleration in the space.
You are just a really big believer in data. What underpins your love of data or your belief that data can change things?
That's a good question. No one's ever asked that before. So again, my PhD is in chemistry, and I think women's health often gets put in this bucket of wellness, which is a great field. It's had a lot of success. But I think to truly make progress in women's R&D and women's medical advancements, we need to put more energy into making secure data and trustworthy data for something to move forward. It can't be based off 1 or 3 people that have done an app or something like that. I want multiple scientists to be able to copy my work. I want it to be standardized. I want it to be QC'd, because that's the only way large pharma is going to take an interest in making this a real juggernaut for the tech industry.
Right. And the world that we live in now is one where when we show a tampon ad on TV or any menstrual product, we're showing a blue liquid because people can't even deal with actually looking at a red liquid, not even menstrual blood, just like a red liquid is too much for people. So in doing this work that you're doing, you must have come up against pushback and roadblocks and attitudes from either potential investors or others who would say to you, ick, Morgan, like, we can't come on this journey with you. Is that the case?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I would say the majority have been very excited and forward thinking, but you definitely come up across people that are just like, why? That's gross. The weirdest has been like, it's women's health is too hard. I actually get that the most out of anything, that it's too difficult. There's too many like complications. And you think of, do we say that about any other disease? So why are we saying that about women's health? And usually, within the first couple minutes. And I'm not here to trying to change their mind. I just, pass on and go find the next person that wants to lead and move women's health forward.
What's the most offensive or unusual or surprising or strange thing that has been said to you in terms of a pushback, and how did you deal with it?
I was at an investor meeting, and a surprising number of men lead the women's health investment teams on these VCs. And maybe they think they're original having a man, but they're actually very more commonplace than you think. I've talked to a lot of them. And he was telling me, because one of the issues of fibroids and endometriosis is that most women, especially if it's severe, will go on to get a myomectomy or hysterectomy, part of their uterus removed. And I was arguing a therapeutic as an alternative, right? That we can give women an option, regardless if they want to be pregnant or not to have an organ removed. And he was arguing that hysterectomies didn't bother women that much unless they wanted to have children. And I was like, well, I disagree. Like, I think having any organ removed is a serious consideration, whether you want to have children or not. And he was asking me if I was polling women to see if they wanted to have children or hysterectomies. It was just a very bizarre question. You think, some of these women are diagnosed early in their 20s or their 30s or 40s. Like, no, who cares if they want to have kids or not? It's their decision to keep their organ. So that conversation ended quickly. It's kind of moved on. But that was one of the more bizarre ones.
Morgan, what is at stake here with the work that you're doing?
To me, people ask well, you're not working on cancer. Well, that's true. I think it's the day-to-day of women's lives, right? I don't think we have to think of women's health in the extremes, like you have to be in the ER or have cancer or just be completely healthy. And there's no middle ground, right, for us to exist. And so I think these diseases that are so prevalent, that give so much pain, are still considered benign. Yeah, you're not going to get cancer. You're not dead. You're not on death's door. It's enough pain to disrupt your life significantly. But the rest of society, the healthcare system has been like, well, it's not enough. And I think companies like mine and other people working in the space are trying to be like, it's an issue. We can solve these problems and make these women's lives better. You don't have to suffer in this middle ground, right? We can address that, and we have the tools and science and training to address it, and we should be doing better. For me, Opal is about getting to this area, like these women's everyday lives. I want to increase their time with their kids, increase their time going to work, increase their time just being without pain is what I want to do. And I think that's just a benefit to society.
I think this points to something you brought up earlier, which is the difference between health and wellness. The wellness industry is a multi-billion-dollar industry worldwide. And I have been thinking about this a lot. What to you is the difference between health and wellness?
I think wellness can come down to more individuals and like what they feel makes them feel better. It can be taking supplements or like preventative exercise, that sort of thing, which are all, positive for each individual. But for me, health is about building data sets on the unknown, right? To like truly prove that something is efficacious, that it will work on a population. You're not selling kind of snake oil to anyone. And I think women's health has had kind of this barrier of the middleman of pharma and biotech. So I've met a lot of early stage R&D companies like myself that are eager to work in women's health, but you're upselling, our products have to go to pharma, large pharma and biotech, and they typically aren't that interested. Many large pharma companies don't have a women's health department, right? So they don't even know where to put you. They're like, well, you're not immunology, you're not neurobiology, you're not oncology. Sorry, like we don't want to buy what you're selling. But then on the very other side, you have the population of women that's very interested in their health. They want more answers, they want more data, and you have this barrier in between. So a lot of companies have pivoted outside of doing B2B to pharma and biotech and actually gone direct to consumer and sell to women directly in this kind of wellness biotech category. And I see the lines here are very much blurred. But I will still say the fundamentals on data and reproducibility are key to move the needle in healthcare and not something like wellness.
You know, I'm still a little taken aback to hear that a lot of pharma companies don't have a women's health department. But why would they when clinical trials are still so unbalanced and skewed towards men that, you know, when I question that, I guess I'm not that surprised. Just always disappointed. Well, listen, if I had ovaries, I would give you my menstrual blood, but I don't. So that good luck with that. I'm so interested.
Thank
Maybe
you.
we can talk in a year's time once your biobank has grown even further.
I would love that.
Well, Morgan, thank you so much for joining me on Overlooked. And this has been a really fascinating conversation, and good luck collecting all that menstrual blood.
Thank you so much, Golda.
Overlooked is here for information and empowerment, but not medical advice. Every person's body is unique. So if you have questions, it is best to speak to your doctor or healthcare provider. We're building a community around women's health so that no one is overlooked. If you'd like to be part of it, hit the follow button on this podcast, wherever you're listening to this. Or you can show us some love by writing us a review and sharing this episode with someone. Overlooked is written and created by me, Golda Arthur. Jessica Martinez de Hoz is the show's producer. You can stay up to date with the show by signing up for the newsletter and following us on Instagram and LinkedIn. We read every review and email, so write to us. hello@overlookedpod.com. Thanks for listening.